it's time that we get started and to dive in. We have a lot to unpack here today, and it's a very different program than we're used to. So get ready to just kind of have a really good conversation. But before we dive in, I want to introduce myself. My name is Cheryl Owen. As you've heard, I just quit my job. So I am founder of Surrounded by Opportunities, and I'm located in New York City. So I want to just explain to everyone what is Culture Chat. The DLE Culture Chat is a business oriented open forum that examines changes and challenges in today's workplace. In just 60 minutes, we aim to engage multiple perspectives through a moderated format that promotes respectful conversations about vital topics with actionable takeaways. Designed for interactivity, the program unites accomplished professionals from various backgrounds. Our goal is to help you grow what you know and who you know in a welcoming professional environment. Before we dive in, I also want to make sure that we shout out our committee members here on the call. Today's program could not have happened without them. So we have Crystal Blake, Informational Technology Manager at General Dynamics Mission Systems in Pittsburgh, Massachusetts. That's a lot. I never really said the whole thing out before, so just now. Um, Aaliyah Marrow, professional tennis player at Women's Tennis Association and screenwriter in Durham, North Carolina. Michelle Lopez, executive director at Berkshire Immigrant Center in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and Greg Bluestein. He's a teacher, guidance counselor, and varsity football defensive coordinator at Everett High School in Everett, Massachusetts. So we have a diverse mix of frequent attendees and newcomers joining in from diverse regions, industries, and even countries. So welcome everyone. I want you to put your information, so your name, your company, where you're located, in the chat box. Let's see where everyone is from. Before we dive into this, and we have to make sure that, and I think I missed someone, I'm sorry, Khaled Roka, there he is, who's also part of our committee, and I am so grateful to have him on our call today, and he works in the finance industry. So I want to review some ground rules here before we dive into it. We want to make sure that you use the chat box for comments and questions pertinent to the topic. Note that we'll be switching up our format today, and breakout sessions will not be a part of this program. Discussion will be guided by live polling and open-ended questions. So we encourage you to use the raise your hand tool, the feature, because it's going to be an open discussion. So that's how we're going to open it up for people to have a conversation about the various topics that we're going to talk about. And each of the topics will be initiated with a poll question. The culture chat will explore the topic of today's evolving workplace. We have invited Cecilia Hirsch to help us get the conversation going, as she is having these kinds of conversations in her role in HR at Williams College in Williamstown, Massachusetts, where she works as manager of Spouse Partners Resources. We are excited to air all of our perspectives, as Culture Chat is a forum where we can openly discuss our experiences and thoughts. Before we get in polling here, let me show you the results of the latest DLE 10-second poll, which asks the question, what are your future work plans? So currently we have about the majority of the people who took the poll are saying that they're going to return to in-person work. But then about 31%, so not too far behind, there's going to be some kind of a hybrid schedule that's going to be implemented. And then 22% of the people who took the poll said that they'll be working remotely. And then about 13% is still unsure as to what their companies are going to be doing. So nationally, statistics show 80% of American employees want to work remotely or hybrid. So this is what I really want to get Cecilia in to kind of talk about what organizations are studying to navigate these new work models, and to ensure equity is built within these new systems that they're developing.
Hi, everyone. Um, I'm really glad to join you all today. And I can't see myself, but I'm assuming you can all see me. Um, I think every employer right now is not necessarily in freak out mode, but is in definite kind of deep thought mode. Um, they had to pivot incredibly quickly to creating a remote workforce a year ago for those who can work remotely. And then I think now many employers were simply hoping to just go back to normal. And I think the reality is, looking at these numbers, looking at national polling, people are not interested in going back to the way life used to be. Um, there is a very well-known statistic by James Clear, who's this behavioral psychologist, that it takes 66 days to form a new habit or behavior. And I think we all went way past 66 days or 66 experiences of working remotely. And for many of us, that's now our new normal. So employers are trying to grapple with the new normal that people are comfortable with, and then the pressures on organizations and businesses, right, to still continue to follow um, legal requirements and actually build equitable remote practices and still function when a lot of places are actually missing employees at this point. There's been a huge turnover in employees. A lot of people have left or are suddenly deciding to leave, like Cheryl. So people are, making changes right now. So it's a really difficult time for those who are not comfortable with change management. So that's kind of where we're at. That's my quick summary.
Thank you for that. So with that being said, let's jump into the first poll here, um, where we're going to really look at the control that you feel over work-life balance since working remotely. All right, we got 100% who voted. And right now, it seems like most people feel like they have control over their work life balance since working remotely. And just a reminder, please use the chat. We're going to have a brief discussion about this poll. And I would love to hear your perspective um, based on the responses that you gave. Yeah, Crystal, go ahead.
Jump in. Um, it's odd because I answered that I feel like I don't have control. I answered no to that poll. Um, I feel like I do have control, but I'm utilizing it differently, that the expectations of me are a little bit different when I'm home. And I've heard lots of people saying, I feel like I'm living at work instead of working from home. And I really do feel like, coming upstairs to work later in the evening after having dinner is pretty regular thing to be doing. So that's why I answered no to that particular poll.
Thank you for that. I completely resonate with that perspective. Thomas?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry, it gave me a thing like, hey, someone's got to get you control. All right, so I guess I'll share. I responded in the affirmative mainly because leadership team I'm working with right now, they are not of the autocratic nature. Like if I can't see you, you're not working. They are the time is your time. So if you want to work a few hours in the morning and break it up and go to the gym or do this, so that's why I feel more control of balance because I'm up at 3 a.m. And if I can get a whole bunch of work done from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m., why not? So my team empowers us to do that. So I guess that's why I answered yes. I think that's what surrounds it, has got to be that leadership directive. If they don't like people work from home, it's going to be difficult. If they don't mind it, not too bad.
Thank you for that. I wish that's how most companies were. Most of the companies I used to work for, they were of the opposite, mindset. But Jesse, I want to hear your perspective.
I answered yes. The whole, I think I do have more flexibility in my work-life balance. Similar to Crystal, though, I think it's like a different type of control. I don't think, like, in terms of, you go to work for these set hours and then log off and like have your night. Like, that's not the way I'm thinking of it. The way that really for me, especially over the past year, that I've learned how to do is set boundaries with my employer and also just with myself, because in the same place, you have to cut yourself off at some point. Like, you could be checking emails all night long if you wanted to, because you have apps on your phone, on your computer, but you shouldn't, because you really need that time to decompress and like think about the day, reflect. And I've learned it can get overwhelming some days, but if you know how to manage your time and manage your boundaries, you can quickly reel it in and have more flexibility. Like, I'm working from Rochester right now, so it's wonderful.
I like the flexibility component of, like, I want to work from a different state. Let me figure out how I can, probably have that conversation with my employer about doing that, and it shouldn't be a problem, right? I think I have one more person, Greg. You want to jump in for the last 2 minutes, and then I also want to make sure Cecilia is jumping into this too, if she has any comments based on what she's heard.
Yeah, no, sure. So I agree with what Thomas said, that I felt a lot less micromanaged. Education, I feel like, is a highly micromanaged field, at least where I am. And there wasn't administrators and principals breathing down your back on, you need to get this done and this done, this done, and actually made me a better professional because, like Jesse said, I was able to learn how to, manipulate my time better and work with deadlines that I had to meet on my own. Doesn't necessarily mean it was better for the community. I think it was worse for the students, but I think that in terms of the work-life balance, I was able to improve on that aspect.
Thank you for that. And then Cecilia, I really want you to jump in. There you are.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's really interesting because all of these are actual, this is the wide range of experience that we're hearing from people. I think in terms of equity, so much depends, of course, on other things happening in your life, right? So some people had to work from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. because they had young kids who they had to take care of during the day. I think what's really interesting about what Thomas said is that there isn't this obligation of being visible. And again, in terms of equity, this whole idea of FaceTime at work is really problematic for a lot of people, like feeling like, oh, I have to hang out in the kitchen and talk to people because I have to somehow like show up and make it seem like I'm really engaged here. And in a way, we've let go of that kind of evaluation of employees, and we're opening the door for more just looking at merit and productivity, right? Like, is he getting his work done? How many hours is he needing? It doesn't really matter as long as he's getting it done. So I think it's interesting to think of those two parameters, that so much of it depends on the individual life that people are living, but they also had this freedom all of a sudden to not have to necessarily fake their presence, or they had an opportunity to be more authentic to their natural work patterns, which is great.
Thank you. So let's launch the second poll. Were you given the choice for your future work environment? The majority of people said yes. I'm very surprised about that. And then So let's go ahead and jump into our discussion of this. Jesse, go ahead.
I wanted to like jump in as soon as possible. I literally just got an email from work about what our reopening plan is. And basically, we've been told it's going to be hybrid. They're working on what that hybrid model will look like. But we have the autonomy to go into the office now. We've been told, I mean, our office has been open since October, but no one's going in just because why would we? But the email that we just got was very adamant on the fact that we will not be forcing you back into the office. If you want to come in now, you can. Starting after Labor Day, we'll up the capacity to 60%, so more of you can come in if you want to. But also, if you want to stay working from home, keep working from home. It's going to be a decision that your team has to make, but ultimately, we've all been working remotely for the past year and a half now, and I don't think any of us have any like desire to rush back in. So I'm really happy that they've made it very clear that there's a choice in this situation, because I know a lot of people that don't have that opportunity.
Yeah, that's very unique. From the conversations I have with my friends here in New York, it's the complete opposite. They're like, you're coming in 3 times a day for the week or whatever the requirements are. Cecilia, do you want to jump in here?
I'm reacting to this chat that I'm reading about this really interesting situation in North Carolina, how the JP Morgan CEO announced that if the office location is in New York City and you're working from North Carolina, you will not be paid New York City wages. This is very unusual because I'm hearing it much more the other way, where basically wherever the office base is where the legal and kind of payroll decisions will be made. And so some people are actually hoping to move to less expensive locations and benefit from a higher wage. So I find that very interesting. I also work with a lot of remote people who work remotely in this area here because we're pretty rural, and most of them payroll works according to where your employer is based. So I find that interesting. With Williams College, what we've done, which is what a lot of higher ed places have done, going back to the whole question of how you're enforcing decisions for employees, we're saying that we are creating longer term working groups to really flesh out next steps for remote work, but that for the time being, we would like everyone to slowly ease on back in and be present physically. Possibly because there's also this feeling that once people are back in person, there will be a sense of, oh, I can do this. Like I can recalibrate, and actually I don't want to work remote anymore. So I think the employers are playing it both ways.
Thank you for that. Thomas?
I know our senior team had a discussion of developing a COVID comeback committee, which would basically be comprised from a cross section of employees throughout the organization who would influence what the reopening strategy would be. But that would also be predicated on certain departments and their functions, and if they needed to be in the office. So they're taking a more, I guess, purposeful approach to understanding, like, wow, we were successful while everybody was remote. You don't want to diminish that. We need to acknowledge that. And if we have been more productive in some capacity, well, why break it? Let's keep it going. So, I've heard a few organizations doing the same kind of thing, creating different pockets of employees to influence what exactly the trajectory is for real.
Yeah, and I think what's really important is for every organization to step back and really come up with what is its mission, right? How does remote work intersect with its mission, and how can each then subsection, right, each department and each unit think about those questions. But the other organizations I have talked to have created almost like a set of principles or a set of guidelines that they are constantly going to go back to. So questions like, is this equitable? is this feeding the bottom line? Whatever the guiding questions might be, but that those are very, very important to keep, because you get into very murky water very quickly when you're facing these big, big questions.
So I have a question, and I really want to talk about, like, if you want to work hybrid or if you want to work remotely, how do you approach your boss, right? How do you tell him or her that I want to stay home without making it seem like I'm disengaging from the team? If anyone has had that conversation, please jump in. How did it go with your boss? Did you have a certain type of relationship with your boss in order to be comfortable having that conversation? Let me know.
I can jump in and tell you how not to do it. Someone who is not named approached someone who is not named and basically said, this is really easy for me because I don't have to pay for daycare. So I would like to keep this arrangement going. This was not the right approach, in case it's not obvious, because it implied that during work hours, this person was also doing childcare and was hoping to do that long term. And so I think you have to be extremely clear about if you are indeed proposing something, how work is still number one, right, during work hours, or if you're creating new work hours, what those work hours will be. And saying something like, you know, this would be super convenient because I could essentially double task or multitask my child rearing and my work, is a very conflicting message to send to an employer.
Interesting. I would challenge that and question, with more companies saying that they're trying to be inclusive of different individuals, and we're going to get to this at the end. How does that play a role into those conversations? But we'll save that for the end. We're going to put a plug on that one. Let me hear from someone I haven't heard yet from Maple.
Yeah, there was a bad example I want to give. Last year, December, we had my year-end review remotely since it was during COVID. And it was confusing and it was not very, I won't say productive, but it's leave me a lot of questions and I had to follow up with many different meetings to clarify. And because one thing, you couldn't read the body language, even though it's on Zoom, but it's still understanding different points that they give and the importance. And a lot of times you read through the body language, and when you're in person, it's much easier to understand. But remotely, it has been difficult, and I had to, after the meeting, and also feel rushed because I mean, when you're in person, you're actually allowed to have the time to sit down and give you some thoughts and think through. But on Zoom, it just leaving the awkward silence. Sometimes it's very difficult to, maybe people just quickly move on. And so that was not a good experience because I had so many questions after the review, and I had to go back and schedule a meeting with my managers individually and just talk through different points. So just my.
Thank you for that. And then Valerie, it will be the last comment here until we have to move on to the next poll question.
Yeah, I think that being able to work remotely has a lot to do with the trust, you know, within the team and within the employer. If there's a high level of trust, I think the employer is more likely to go the remote work route, but otherwise probably not. And I know sometimes it takes time to build that trust. In this situation with the COVID, we were forced to work remotely. So we were able to build that trust, you know, live. So now it's interesting because now we have the opportunity where we're going to be doing a hybrid, which, you know, 2 years ago would have never, ever been considered. So.
Thank you for your comment. So our next question, you can put it up, Nicole. Have you thought about leaving or changing your job because of the options afforded to you? So most people said no to this question. Very interesting. So my, I guess to kick off the discussion here, um, like what impact have you seen, Cecilia, based on the statistics that you're seeing, of the impact on recruitment and retention if they don't give people the option to work remotely in some capacity?
Yeah, I think this poll result is interesting because it does not reflect the national trend right now. So you guys are, happily loyal and entrusting relationships with your teams, which is super. I think people have delayed thinking about their career. They've delayed moves. They've delayed lots of activity. They've also picked up side gigs during COVID. And some of these side gigs are becoming, people were testing stuff out during COVID. Like, could I actually do this? Um, could I do this on my own, or could I detach myself from my current employer? And a lot of times the answer is yes. So yeah, retention and recruitment are huge issues for employers right now. So I think employees are really running the show. Like, they have a lot of clout right now. I think employers are desperate in pretty much every sector. So, I do think that is where these questions about remote work will come to the forefront. There's a lot of discussion in HR in general about creating, like, in job descriptions, right? Kind of like location expectations that are more detailed than just remote possible or something like that. And actually having job descriptors that end up saying things like, ideally, this job would be based in San Francisco. We want a minimum of a 1 week presence on site. There will be an office provided, 1 week required every 6 weeks. I mean, like, really getting into the details of it before people even apply. So, but yeah, employers are being forced to face this stuff and become much more flexible.
Thank you for those insights. Jesse, I want to hear from you.
I actually had to deal with that like location situation scenario because my team is in the process of hiring a bunch of positions for the content team. And I noticed on the job description website that there isn't any mention of location. And so I reached out to my boss and I was like, does that mean the expectations that we need to recruit New York-based employees, or are we open to whatever? And she responded and she was like, we're open to wherever. And so that's why we're not noting, where the location of this job is, because the assumption of our industry, at least at my company, is it's going to be hybrid anyway. So if we hire someone in California or in, Texas or wherever, ideally it would be nice to at least meet them in person at some point, but that's not going to be a requirement on if we hire that person or not. So
thank you. Greg.
So Game of Thrones has the saying chaos is a ladder, and throughout COVID, public education, we aren't allowed to make decisions on when we come back or if we stay hybrid or whatnot. This is, we are doing as the government in our district says, which we've returned back to school in, I believe, April, in fully in person. For students, it was optional, but I believe students will be forced to go back fully in person next year. And with that being said, I think that there's something to be said for being able to find a pattern and work through it to improve yourself professionally. And I know that I took advantage of this opportunity because my job previous to COVID was already a lot of remote work. And I just made myself that much more valuable during this time to try to climb that ladder and earn positions. And I know for the students, you know, I'll speak for Christian just because I had him in class actually. We saw that there were students that took advantage of the situation and really dug in and got really high marks, or it was the exact opposite and they couldn't handle the virtual work and they fell off, and there was really no middle ground.
That brings up a really good point where I'm going to throw this question out here is, do you feel your decision about remote employment would affect your ability to get promoted? Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, so I've been studying. Brian threw it out there. Jamie Dimon at J.P. Morgan Chase. He's the one you want to study right now. So there's a New York Times article on the 23rd about chance meetings in the office. Do they really boost innovation? Because Jamie Dimon came off and said, I got the article actually in front of me. I love this. So working from home doesn't work for spontaneous idea generation, and it doesn't work for culture. So he's made it pretty clear that the culture is, I really expect we're going to be in person. So we have a number of DLE alumni who work for JP Morgan, and I wanted to find out where are they in their heads. And they've gotten used now to not commuting an hour and a half one way to get to work. And if I go back to Cecilia's comments about 66 days, I'm now in a new habit. And of having done that in my life when I lived in the metro New York area, spending 3 hours a day in a car is now I'm going through really deep thought and saying, do I really want to stay in this job? And by the way, if I stay in this job and come in every day, is this fun anymore? Because I have a new norm. And so promotability is probably going to be affected at JP Morgan by if you choose to be in the room versus not. They've made it pretty clear. But I think the big thing is, how much do I want to change my lifestyle again, when it was, you know, so you commute an hour and a half. So did everybody else. Well, I haven't done that now for 15 months. Do I want to do that again?
Thank you for that. And it also saves money on your Metro card, at least here in New York. So Maple, let me hear from you.
So Linda and I actually discussed about the policy, and comparing people who much prefer working from home versus people prefer working in office. I think they are people who are more introverted based on our reservation. It's an anecdote who prefer to work from home, and people who are more extroverted, they prefer to work in the office. So that creates already a bias, because there are numerous research that people who are more extroverted, they're more likely to get promoted. And when you creating this kind of hybrid culture, how do you make sure you're breaking that bias to give equal promotion to both type of personality of the employees? So that's what employer has to deal with.
You have Cecilia jump in. Maybe you want to comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hugely important. This is where communication is key. Trust is super important. Employers have to build their expectations for employees, and they have to communicate them well, regardless of what setting you're in. And I think that this remote life has actually forced employers to have to be much, much clearer about what it means to meet expectations, to exceed expectations, and to look at a promotion. I think there have been a lot of interesting merit-based bumps across the board in organizations based on how people have handled the COVID crisis, and it's been a really interesting test for the promotion world in general, because people kind of went in two directions with COVID. They either went all out, right? They went way beyond their job requirements, or they reinvented their job. They became like superheroes, or a lot of people just locked down and just kind of, just kept up with the most that they could keep up with, which was a minimum. So looking at promotions has really changed this year, like thinking about how you assess an employee's worth, especially in the context of a time of crisis. Like, so do we expect our employees to rise to this like incredible level? Like when you were talking about public school teachers, Greg, I mean, public school teachers, it was like, I'm keeping my head above water and that is all I can do, right? So it's very, very interesting. I think communication here is hugely important. I find that, you know, I just think there is a lot of data showing that people at home are, you know, 15 to 20% more productive. So you've got the productivity piece at home. So the question, you know, that I would ask this JP Morgan guy is, what are we gaining from the social piece and from that kind of interaction, and how can we get that without necessarily forcing everyone to be together all the time?
So right now we're going to jump into the question. Remember that point I said we're going to put a plug in. We're going to bring it back here now again, and we're going to talk about how this transition has affected women, employees of color, employees with disabilities, and special accommodations. How is this going to affect them in the workplace? And this is becoming important because you see more corporations putting out DEI, you know, initiatives or policies, but yet it seems like their actions are not following through on that, right? So I'm curious what I want to hear what you have to say on this topic. Cecilia, you can get started.
So I think this is really fascinating, right? As a woman, I've experienced some of this. I think there have been incredible pressures on caregivers. There have also been things that have completely left the table, like having to do your hair a certain way or spend exorbitant amounts on clothes. And I mean, it's been very, very interesting for different groups to face some of the realities of what going into the office meant. And I think these are huge issues. I mean, equity, and you know, there are so many things in our white-centered world, right, that did not accommodate for the needs of so many employees. And I think this year has matched the COVID year, also matched with a rise in self-awareness from a lot of employers who had not even contemplated any of these issues. So I think it's just a real time of reckoning. And now I think it's up to employers to kind of take the words and the kind of larger concepts that they would like to embody in their workplace and actually come up with policies that support the employees. So, you know, if an employee says, I don't feel safe in this work environment, how do we now translate that, right? As employers, I think that's really, really a huge future thing. I'm really interested in where this is going. I'd love to hear feedback from people.
Hi, everybody. I think I speak about this with Brian and Linda fairly often, that there's also partially, and I'm coming from it from a little bit of a different angle. I'm definitely very appreciative for everything that I have, but there's also some things I think that battles have to be picked. And I think we've seen, in a great way for employees, a lot more power that employees have. But at the same time, there may be some jobs or maybe some responsibilities that have to be done in person. There may be events where you do have to dress a certain way or, you know, dress up. And I think that now that employees got empowered more, there still has to you are still employed by an employer, and if they're requiring you to come into an office X amount of days per week, you know, is that a battle that is worth fighting, or, you know, is it something that you kind of just have to accept? I don't know if that makes complete sense, but I guess where I'm really going with it is there are definitely some places or opportunities that thrive in person, and I think it's also it's a good responsibility that people have. Then there's also, you know, if you're driving an hour and a half with a kid, and you are able to complete your job 3 times better by only going into the office 1 day a week, that also makes sense. And I think that only 2 sides of the spectrum are spoken about, where it's like, you work from home, you're going to get a lot more done, or you're going to go into the office 5 days a week. And I think it's different for everybody. That's really where I was going. And it's hard to set a standard if it's different for everybody.
Yeah, I've in my experience, when companies are not able to really adjust their policies or quote unquote policies, and I put it in quotes because they always adjust their policies for individuals, but some of them are not really willing to move based on what they say is a set standard for everyone, and that's where it becomes problematic oftentimes. Thomas, you had your hand up.
Yes, in a previous life, I used to coach high potential employees. And the one thing I make sure they always understood is you can fire your employer. So Charles, to your comment earlier, if someone gives you that hard line, like, you got to work in the office, not, that comes down to, well, you know what? And I think it goes back to the early conversation too. My life's changed a lot. There are organizations. I live in Springfield, Massachusetts, but I can now probably get a job in, Dallas, Texas because of remote work. So the world's changed for employees. The world's changed for employers too. And I don't think it's really going to flesh out for the next year and a half to 2 years about what it all really means, the magnitude of it all. How do we fairly assess? If I know my COGS, my cost of goods sold and everything, maybe I can come up with a good metric to apply to all employees for raises. But I think a lot of this is going to be a work in progress. Some people are going to get it right. Some people are going to fall. And when they do fall, employees are going to go to employers that do get it right. So the JP Morgans of the world may get a short gain, but in the long term, they could lose some valuable employees because they are just so rigid in that kind of approach. So I think, like I said, it's going to be the great, reshuffling, I think is how I've been seeing it in the news. It's going to play out for a while.
Aaliyah, good point. Thank you for that.
I know that I don't work in corporate, but based on stories that I've heard from my friends, I know that a lot of women of color or women, a lot of microaggressions have actually gone up. A lot of biases have gone up because communication, if they don't respect you, in person, they certainly probably won't respond or respect to you through the internet, through Zoom, through this. And this is very prevalent for women of color. And that is something that I don't know if it's talked about a lot. Again, I'm not in corporate at all. This is just based off of stories from friends and stuff. So that I know has been a big, I guess people have been thinking like, well, I should probably go in because, I don't really get that much respect being home, etc. So it's just a thought.
Thank you.
It's really interesting, Aaliyah. Sorry, I'm just jumping in here, but
Right.
I just think, this ties into the whole privacy workplace dichotomy, right? And that some people have felt very uncomfortable inviting people into their homes and have tried to come up with ways, to have the most neutral kind of space possible, or using the Zoom backgrounds and stuff. We have invited our workplace into our homes, and it's a very strange experience. I mean, like, I'm in my home right now, and you guys are all seeing my home. So it's just, I think for people, especially who do a lot of code switching between work and home, and who they are in one place, who they are in another, who they are as a woman in one place, who they are as a woman in another. I mean, there are wonderful boundaries that have come down. Like, I think if a kid walked behind me now, no one would flinch. So there are some things that have worked for the positive, but I think in other ways, we have a long way to go.
Thank you for that. Yeah, as if the workplace is not diverse and it's not inclusive, you're not putting in policies, then it really hinders your ability to grow. And when the policies are so rigid, which has oftentimes been my experience with corporate America is that they're not willing to make the exceptions oftentimes. They'll just say, well, this is our policy, regardless of what your situation is, right? And that becomes problematic, and you lose talent that way. You're not able to attract and retain talent when that is the approach that you're taking. And now we're seeing that with the ability for people to be hybrid or for people to work from home. Are you going to stay rigid? Are you going to use the term that it's our culture, right? And culture oftentimes really is centric on white culture. So oftentimes we're saying, hey, I have to code switch now to the culture, which is oftentimes focused on white America, for me to be included here. But on that note, Linda, you have a comment.
I'm reacting to Khaled's chat there, assumptions that people might make working from home in the background. And this is going to take me back to probably April when we went virtual in March. And so now we're reaching everybody, and we've got people in all different kinds of settings. And one of our speakers was living in a very, very, very small New York City apartment. And we did a practice with him. And I had to ask the speaker to make his bed, because his bedroom was his office. And it was a really, really, I don't want to be in people's bedrooms, but that's his office. And right off the bat, you're making an assumption about, geez, he's always so perfectly coiffed, and how can he not make his bed? Well, okay. So I had a bias right in my head, and you really have to become much more conscious of this new bias by looking around. You now have a lot of cues about me, whether I'm in my home or in my office, that you wouldn't have seen, particularly in my home before. But I felt right away, boy, this is going to be a tough one in April, with looking into people's homes and really being conscious to get that out of my head.
Oh, I love that. Before I moved into this new apartment, none of my walls were blank. So like when I put my video on, you would always see something on a wall, just because it was so small, right? I live in New York. So oftentimes I didn't want to put my video. I was like, well, it's just not the right environment for me to do that. So thank you for that. I've experienced that firsthand. But some of the key takeaways that we got from this, and I want Cecilia to kind of jump in, and I loved hearing everyone's perspective and your feedback. I actually love the way we did this culture chat. Put a thumbs up, put your reaction as a thumbs up if you loved it. We want to get your feedback. Cecilia, love for you to jump in here.
Well, I'm just thinking about, again, disparity of, I think all these disparities in our culture really came to the head this year. And I think we're all super, super aware of it. I'm imagining this apartment, Linda, and I'm thinking, this is probably an apartment that's like whatever, $2,000 a month, right? And for $2,000 a month, you could have had someone doing a culture chat presentation in some rural North Carolina setting. That would have been like a gorgeous, lavish space. So I think for me, what's been really wonderful is opening my eyes to different lives. So for me, it's been valuable because I think HR really has to remember that they serve employees, and the better you get to know your employees, the better it is. So for me, that's been a huge perk. But I do know that for a lot of people, this has been, massively stressful, and, trying to make sure that the neighbors aren't blasting music, or that, there have been people with construction in the neighborhood. There's been every level of everything. So, for me, what's exciting is that we're opening our eyes to the future, which was coming anyways, right? It has just sped up the process of, I remember a year and a half ago being like, why would I do a Zoom meeting with someone? Why would I actually do that? And now it's very clear why a Zoom meeting might be really worthwhile, why a phone call might be really worthwhile, why an in-person meeting might be worthwhile. I think it's broken down a lot of walls and opened up a lot of doors. We just have to be open to the changes. And, someone in an HR chat I was in recently asked the big question, like, what if we see this really as an opportunity for incredible change rather than, anything else, and really grabbing that what if moment, like, what if we actually did something good here, right? Which is a question we could ask ourselves on a lot of levels in this country. So, yeah.
Thank you. And one of the takeaway that I want to kind of highlight here also is essentially corporations will need to set metrics of what productivity looks like, what in order for people to get promoted, and are people's careers being hindered because they want to work remotely? And if it is, then I think it's worth for corporations to really think through that process as to why that's happening and why that has been the case. So it's time for me to hand it off to Linda to kind of close out the program.
Brian had put in the chat, we wouldn't have been having this conversation 2 years ago. Of course, we're going to revisit this in 3 months because this topic will have evolved another dynamic. I was saying to the group that one of the last articles that I was reading, I read about this every day, was about, okay, well, during COVID, I adopted a dog. So now if I have to go back to the office, I'm going to bring my dog, because my dog now is part of my work extension. So that's going to be a next one. Jesse's very happy about that. I just want to say this is our last culture chat for the summer. We'll come back in September, but we need ideas from you. And we do a quick poll right after the every program. Please take it. Cecilia has given us a whole list of resources that we compiled into a handout. It's a bonus handout. You'll get that for completing the poll. We take all of that feedback really seriously. Our Culture Chat team is a group of amazing volunteers, and you met them, but I want to introduce them again. Crystal and Cheryl, Khaled, Aliyah, Greg, Michelle, and Cheryl, dynamic in your facilitation today. I mean, it was expert. Even though we do dry runs, this gets better. So they put lots of hours in planning. We do want your ideas to make this meaningful and memorable and also participative. And this was an amazing cast of participants today. Thank you so much for doing it. If you're in the Berkshires, if you're visiting in the Berkshires, if you're living in the Berkshires, we have started something in person, and it's because folks wanted to get together again. We used to have in person. So if you are visiting or in the Berkshires, come out on Friday mornings. We had it this morning. Crystal and I were there with our group. It was great. We can talk about whatever. We don't have any planned programs, so it's a wonderful, diverse conversation. We start at 7 at Dottie's in downtown Pittsfield. We last till, well, whenever, an hour. Or maybe 15 minutes if you have to go, but please come visit us. We're also exploring some other programming for the fall, including an 8-hour workshop that would encompass both direct on-demand learning as well as live conversations, and it's around the topic of cultural intelligence. So we are in lots of exploration mode. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time today. Have a great summer if we don't see you live, and come back in September for more of the Culture Chat.